Welcome to a side quest episode of Respawn Aimfire, a special BARF episode, which is a backlog accomplishment, blah, 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 a backlog accomplishment with Respawn and friends.
I think we might need to redo that intro.
No, we're keeping it.
We're keeping it.
I was trying really, really hard to keep that in. I just wanted to let it be known. Really, really hard.
Well, I'm going to make sure I try really hard to keep
Unless
it in the episode.
Unless you're like, no, I'm uncomfortable having that in there. Otherwise, it's steam engines rolling ahead and forward.
All right.
We're going. All right. So this is Respawn Aimfire, the Kick-Ass Urban Gaming Podcast. This is our BARF episode, which is Backlog Accomplishments with Respawn and Friends. Every month we pick a game that you vote on through our Patreon and decide what we'll be playing each month. This month, well, technically last month now, was Majora's Mask, which we've been wanting to play for quite a long time. I am Holden DePardo. I'm here with Chad Michael Innes,
Hola.
Our usual co-host. We also have a special guest this week, which is Alex Kozina, also known as Cozy Bear on Twitch, who is the master chef extraordinaire.
Cozy Bear Live. Just
Cozy Bear Live
so that we're
okay.
Perfectly clear. Twitch.tv/Cozy Bear Live. Well, I mean, it's a long-ass story. We don't have time to get into it. Twitch.tv/Cozy Bear Live.
From now on, I will only refer to you as twitch.tv/Cozy Bear Live.
Hell yeah. Get that SEO out there.
Yep.
Yeah, so we'll be talking about Majora's Mask a little bit. I was going to ask Alex to introduce himself, but you kind of already did. So unless there's anything more you want to add there.
I don't know. I feel like if you've been watching this podcast for the past little while, you probably know who I am.
Yeah, you were our first guest.
I'm Alexander Kozina. That's right. I was. I do cooking streams over on twitch.tv/Cozy Bear Live. I'm part of a Canadian gaming podcast called Press While IZ. You know, catch me on the internet webs, catch me on the streets after the pandemic's over. I'm a good guy. Good time. You can tell it's been a little while since I've been guested on a podcast in a while. I don't really know, like, how I'm supposed to kind of insert myself into the flow of conversation here, but hopefully I'll figure out over the course of the next hour.
You're good. You're welcome. Anytime you want to interject and say something, you're good. I trust you.
I feel like it's cool. It's the Talladega Nights. Like, I don't know what to do with my hands.
We're going to be starting off with just a little bit of background on Majora's Mask, which doesn't really require that much background info to begin with, I feel like, because it's Majora's Mask. I think like everyone knows that it's a Zelda game, and it's one of the biggest game franchises ever. Majora's Mask is a little interesting, though, because it was the first time a Link character had been reused for a sequel game. Not the first sequel in Zelda. I'm pretty sure it's the first time there's a sequel where this is the same exact Link used in the previous game.
Well,
Zelda
so there are some
maybe.
people... Zelda 2, yes, I believe so. I was also going to say a lot of people contend that Link's Awakening is a direct sequel to the one before it, A Link to the Past, because in the manual for Link's Awakening it talks about how Link ridded Hyrule of Ganon, but then, you know, there were concerns about his return, and so he went on an expedition. But the nature of Link's Awakening is such that you could theoretically fit it into a bunch of other spots in the timeline. But I'm pretty sure that if you actually go to the official Zelda timeline, it comes exactly after A Link to the Past and is implied to be a sequel to that game. But you are right that, like, it's rare that we have Zelda games that are direct sequels to each other where you're playing as the same Link.
I did not know that about Link's Awakening. That's very interesting. And basically just means that this Link in Ocarina of Time Majora's Mask is like nothing special. Like, this is not the first roundabout, not the first rodeo Link, all right? He needs to get over himself. What's most interesting about this Zelda game, I think, is that it is reusing the assets of Ocarina of Time, primarily so it could speed up development and get this game out. And it came out in about 2 years, which is faster than I think any Zelda game of the mainline kind of series in 3D has come out. Which is super, super impressive.
And that's that's actually what really kind of sets it apart, right? Is that every single time that Nintendo puts out a new Zelda game, typically they have to kind of completely rethink from the ground up. They have to, you know, come up with all sorts of new gameplay mechanics, all sorts of, like, a completely new, refreshed art style. And this is one of the few Zelda games where they're like, no, we're just gonna make like a direct sequel where we do change up a lot of things, as we'll get into it, but it's not that substantially different. which is what really kind of sets it apart.
I also watched a
And
retrospective
visually,
today.
it's definitely not substantially. Go ahead,
I
Chad.
watched a retrospective about the making of Majora's Mask today as well, and apparently the idea of it and like the dungeons and things like that were born out of what's the dungeon designer for Ocarina of Time, NG whatever. He's now like part of the mainline Zelda series all the time. Anyway, he was the director of this one too, and they told them to make Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time Master Quest, just rearrange the dungeons and make them like different so we can resell
Right.
it. And he didn't want to do that. He found that boring, so he started making other dungeons secretly instead. And then like partway through Master Quest, he's like, "Hey, I've been making these dungeons. Can we just make a new game?" And so they're like, "Oh yeah, that sounds great. Let's make that as well." After Master Quest is done, he's like, "Oh, thank God."
That's super cool. So I think most of us have played Zelda Majora's Mask before, if I'm correct.
Yes.
A lot of times.
Okay, this is the first time I have finished it, but I've tried playing it before in the past. So this is kind of weird to say what are our initial impressions, because we kind of all already have initial impressions. But Cozy, let's start with you. What were kind of your impressions with the playthrough of Zelda Majora's Mask?
Yeah, so I mean, as you said, this is a game that I played many times in the past. So like back in the day, I had a friend who had 2 Nintendo 64s, and through some means or another, I got my hands on one of those Nintendo 64s, and I used it to gradually play through a bunch of the kind of first-party hits from its library. So, for example, Ocarina of Time, Pokemon Snap, Pokemon Stadium, a couple other things. Majora's Mask was one of the last games that I played for it. I don't remember exactly what year I played it, but I'd like to say it was like 2004 or 2005. So it had been a few years like since its release, but it wasn't that long ago, considering that Majora's Mask was released in the year 2000. And at the time, I was well familiar with the mechanics and tropes of the Zelda series, having played Ocarina of Time, A Link to the Past, and a couple of others. And I really kind of thoroughly enjoyed this game. It's like more or less equal for me with Ocarina of Time in terms of like my preference of it compared to the other Zelda games. The thing about Majora's Mask is that at the time that I played it, it was in that very specific period in my life, and I'm sure that we've all had these periods in our own lives where you don't particularly care about reading spoilers or not being spoilt to what happens in a game. And so going into Majora's Mask, I was like well aware of many of the twists and unexpected turns that it would take. I was well aware, for example, that Link would turn into a Deku Scrub within the first few minutes of the game. I was well aware of the fact that the Majora's Mask is this malevolent spirit and that he's secretly controlling Skull Kid. And so there were very few like genuine surprises in that regard going into the game. And also because I didn't really give a crap, I also like liberally read guides as I was going through the game, so there were very few moments that gave me much trouble. But neither of those things really kind of ruined my experience with it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. When it came around time to play the remake of the game on the 3DS, however, I was in a bit of a different place in my life. But if possible, I'd actually like to save my thoughts on the 3DS remake until a little bit later in the podcast.
Alex,
Chad,
in the absence of
what did you think of?
When you said through one means or another, I acquired one of those N64s, you didn't tell us how you got it, so I made up a story in my brain about you chloroforming your friend in the middle of the night and then moving across borders to Canada.
No, it was not. It was not nearly as malicious as that. No, it was that point in your life where you're like, none of these things really have any kind of value to me, so I'm just gonna like lend this game to you. I'm gonna lend this entire video game console to you. And like my friend did that with me, and that's how I got his video game console. And I definitely did that with my friend, where I had a Game Boy Advance that was cracked. It still functioned perfectly, but its screen was cracked. And I lent him my Game Boy Advance because I'm like, hey, you claim that you can fix it somehow. All right, I'm going to pass it off to you, not really kind of putting any value in it, not thinking, hey, maybe I should go to an actual repair person, thinking that I could get it repaired there. And lo and behold, I never saw that Game Boy Advance again. It was just that, time in your life.
Yeah.
I believe that alibi, but I am suspicious of Chad, who's questioned Alex on murder and asked me people I've thought about killing before the chat.
People who are watching this on
Chad's
demand
very obsessed with
don't
murder
have the
today.
murder part in. We cut that out as part of the pre-show. So they don't have context. There's nothing on record.
It happened tonight. All very close together. Chad, why did you want to kill Majora's Mask? Because clearly murder is on your mind.
This was, like Alex, I played this game for the first time back on N64. I was 10 when the game came out. We had just gotten and beat, we'd beat Ocarina of Time 1 trillion times, my brother and I. And this was a bribe. This game was a bribe for me. I was a Boy Scout. I was a hefty Boy Scout. And I was terrified to go rappelling at this Boy Scout camp. Rappelling, for anyone who doesn't know, is when you go to the top of this structure or a tower and you use a rope and you climb down the side of it. And so my dad bribed me and he said, what if I buy you a video game? Then will you rappel down the tower? And I was like, yes. He's like, all right, what do you want? The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask? And he said, okay. So I got this as a bribe. Best decision I ever made because rappelling also turns out to be really fun. And I played this game. I played the first 2 dungeons of this game a lot. As I mentioned, I was 10 when it came out. And I was still in the stage where anytime we played Ocarina of Time, I would make my brother play Jabu Jabu's Belly because it was too hard for me, and the princess carrying her around was obnoxious. So like it was that
Right.
It was that kind of an experience for me. So Majora's Mask is definitely harder, especially with the time constraints of the 3-day window. So I never finished it. I never got past the 7 eggs in the Zora, in the Great Bay.
Yeah.
So I never got to finish the game until the 3DS came out. I got that Majora's Mask 3DS. I don't know why I held it upside down in real life, expecting the camera to flip it for me. Look at that sexy. Ooh. When that came out, I said, you are an adult man. You no longer need people to beat Jabu Jabu for you. You're going to finish this game. And I did. So that was, what year was that? Was it 4 years ago? I feel like 3 years ago, maybe.
2016?
The game came out in 2015.
2015,
Okay, it was
Jesus,
then.
that was 6 years ago. Highly Gashiza. So yeah, I did. At that time, I beat it, and I got every single mask. I got Fierce Deity Link. As a kid, I was freaking obsessed with Fierce Deity Link, having never, of course, gotten to that point in the game where I could actually play as him, nor ever seeing him in anything other than the official strategy guide that I had. But I was obsessed, so I finally got to do that as an adult and cheese the final boss, and I was very, very pleased with it. It is initial impressions and guilty admission here. Initial impressions of beating the whole game, wonderful, fantastic, maybe my favorite Zelda, definitely the coolest one of all time. Admission of guilt, I did not replay this game for BARF this month. I did the same thing we always do, and I kind of put it off to the last week, and then I looked at how long to beat, and I was like, what does a Zelda game take? 10, 12 hours? No, it does not. So I decided instead today to watch a speed run of it, a 5-hour speed run, 100% speed run. And it was the very first speed run I've ever watched of anything, and those are fucking fascinating. I loved that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to watch Games Done Quick whenever it comes back again. And then I also watched a retrospective on it as well, so I could get a little bit more context for the story outside of the speedrun portions. So I'm fresh on everything, and I've experienced everything at least once in my life. But I like the game a lot.
I have something to confess, Chad, and
What?
it's that I actually did not play Majora's Mask this month either.
Am I the only one?
do a lot of research into it, like leading up to this episode, because there are a bunch of things that I want to get into later on in this podcast, just to refresh myself as well. But it's the kind of thing where, like, I also looked into, like, how long is this going to take me? What else am I doing this month? And turns out it takes a lot of time to platinum knack. So, unfortunately,
Here's what I did do, though.
Majora's Mask didn't get any love.
I did load up my 100% save on my 3DS today. I beat the final boss again. I jumped around, played around with all the different masks, killed some enemies, went back to some of the dungeons and did a couple of things for about an hour. So I experienced the mechanics of it again and beat the final boss again.
I had the hardest time with this game, and I was going to stop playing it due to a technical issue, but I kept going. It would just crash on me all the time. All the time it would crash on me. I have no idea why.
This is the 3DS version?
The 3DS version, yeah. I would walk into a room, boom, crashed. I would reload my save, it wouldn't happen, and every time I'd go in somewhere, I'm like, is it going to do it again? Is it going to do it? Fuck, it did it again.
No.
But I permeated through, I got through it, and I'm very mixed on this Zelda game. There are so many things that are like pinnacle high of Zelda, like the dungeons themselves, but I really loathe the time mechanic of the game. It made it. I get why it's there. It's a cool part of the story. It's a cool mechanic, but man, did it make those dungeons really stressful when you were trying to get all 15 stray fairies in every single dungeon and get through it, and to get to the boss and go, it's almost midnight on the third day, or almost 6 o'clock in the morning on the first day, or the third day. I'm screwed. I'm not going to beat this boss, and then I don't beat the boss. I have to go through the entire dungeon all over again, and especially when it's crashing on you. And there was just a lot of factors I think that kind of like hurt my experience with this one. But yeah, like I really liked the dungeons. I wish I had the freedom to explore them at my own will, as opposed to feeling like I had to run through them all the time. Mostly because I'd also forget to do this, the inverted time song. So I'd actually have less time than I really should have had because I did that to myself. But I really like it. I really wish it didn't have the time mechanic. I think it's kind of my like initial impression on the game. Oh, I forgot to mention, Chad and I both have the 3DS.
Jace.
This is important to mention.
Yeah.
So this is how kind of Chad and I started becoming really good friends.
We'd
always kind of talked about you bribed me. We always kind of just talked about video games every once in a while at work. Like we were chummy with each other. And I had mentioned I wanted to get the Majora's Mask 3DS because they sold out already. I was really bummed. And Chad's like, I pre-ordered 2 of them. So if you want one, you can buy one off of me. And he didn't charge me any extra. He didn't do a PS5 scalp situation.
I'm just that nice.
Charged me 300 times the cost of the 3DS. And so yeah, I'm like, hey, this dude's kind of chill. And then we just started hanging out outside of work after that. So this kind of like is bringing everything full circle in the podcast. Now we're playing it for the podcast, and the podcast would not have happened if it weren't for Majora's Mask and this 3DS. So kind of a cool thing.
Fun fact. The man that delivered those Majora's Mask 3DSs to Chad's house might have had Kozina at the end of his name.
Other fun fact.
It's all coming together.
We're all here together.
I gave away about 50 of them for free, and you're the only person I charged for one.
So to kind of start off like talking about the whole game as a whole, I think the dungeons is probably the best place to start, because I think if there's anything that's like the staple of Zelda, it is the dungeons themselves. So how did you guys feel about the dungeons? Was there a favorite one you want to call out? Did you hate all of them? Did you love all of them? Anyone who wants to begin can go.
I think as per usual, I hated the water shit. The water dungeon was so... the rising levels and the different flow of the water, and also get it done in 3 days and find all the fairies and shit. And it's just like they're tried and true. Water dungeons are always pieces of shit. I hated it. Absolutely hated it. And the boss itself of the water dungeon, the big old fish, wasn't particularly interesting as a fight for me.
With regards to the boss of the water dungeon, how did you feel about the remake of that boss on the 3DS? Oh, wait a minute. You never played the original version of that boss.
I never played the original.
No.
Right? How different is it?
Okay, so I have a document pulled up in front of me of all the changes between the 3DS version of Majora's Mask and the Nintendo 64 version of the game. And so to begin with, it should be pointed out that people had been demanding for a remake of this game for the 3DS for years before it was actually announced, because one of the first big Nintendo first party games that they put out on the 3DS was Ocarina of Time 3D. And so people assumed, must be super easy to just bring over Majora's Mask to the platform as well. You just got to change the file name extension at the end and you're all good to go. It actually ended up taking Grezzo quite a few years to adapt that game for the 3DS, and part of the reason why it took so long is because they straight up went in and like changed a lot of things in the game, including the bosses. In the original version of Majora's Mask, it's not super obvious, particularly I would say in the case of the first and third bosses, of how it is you're supposed to defeat them. And in the 3DS remake of the game, they introduced these like giant bulging eyeballs on their designs to make it super obvious, like, hey, aim for the eyeballs if you want to defeat these guys. And in the, like, it's funny that you say that you didn't really enjoy the boss of the third dungeon, because the original version of that boss in the like Nintendo 64 version, it's like, it's not even clear how you're supposed to fight him in the first place, like weird water physics and controls notwithstanding.
Yeah.
I had a hard time with that to begin with, because the first phase you can just swim around him and do your like twist thing when you're the Zora and hit him, and then the second phase you have to like knock the spike things into his mouth, and it took me a little while to figure that out. I thought those were obstacles to get out of the way at first, so I just kept knocking them to get them out of the way. And I just kept, I'm like, oh, they keep popping up, and I'm like, kept getting rid of them. Like, this boss battle's taking a long time.
Yeah, all the like knocking the spikes into the boss, that was like completely fabricated for the 3DS version of the game.
Oh, really?
In the original version of the game, like, it's been a while, but I'm pretty sure it's kind of like a free-for-all where like you can kind of rely on a variety of different strategies to take him down, which is one of those things where I think for the 3DS version of the game, they're like, we need to make it a little bit more obvious what you're supposed to be doing on a minute-to-minute basis.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I
didn't
kinda feel
realize
like
the
that's
changes
a
were
problem
that
in general
drastic.
with some of the dungeons. Oh yeah, it was a significant update. Yeah. I didn't I kind of felt like loss of direction was a big problem for me in the game, especially in the dungeon design. It's very vague sometimes which way you're supposed to be going. Like, I feel like, especially in that water dungeon, like, to call what you're talking about, Chad, with the rising water levels and the specifically the switches that make the different like water platforms pop up. Mm-hmm. Like, I felt like you would hit a switch across the map of the dungeon, and you have to go all the way back to the first room again to actually see that platform rise. And I'm like, what the hell? Like, that took me a little while to figure out. Even though it was the same color, I just hadn't connected, and I wasn't sure what I'd even done. I was really confused. And that also happened in the Stone Tower as well, even though I liked that dungeon the best.
I think that was my favorite dungeon too.
Very vague. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the Stone Tower Temple is probably my favorite one as well. I mean, I think some of the vagueness of their designs just stems from the fact that, like, they're meant to be dungeons that you go back to multiple times, maybe like complete half of them in one day, and then you load up your next day and go back to them. And so if they feel a little bit more maze-like, if they feel a little bit kind of unconventional in terms of their design, it's because they're meant to be like explored multiple times and not necessarily be explored in like a single linear fashion the way that you would like a typical Zelda dungeon. That's at least my kind of interpretation of their kind of confusing nature.
And that's where I'm really kind of caught, because I think on one hand, like, there's an argument that these are some of the best dungeons in Zelda, like, period. Especially the Stone Tower Temple, which was it the Stone Tower Temple? Is that what it is? I can't. Whatever, you guys know what I'm talking about.
I think so. Yeah.
With that one in particular, there were so many things like you have to make sure that there's a chest on the ceiling when you flip it around. That way you can go back there and grapple hooks, you can land in the right spot, and like all that's really, really cool, but it's so not obvious, and you really have to iterate through these and do them. In my case, I had to do some dungeons twice to like really get through it. And I liked that because it kind of turns into a puzzle box. Like, I kind of wish that like Stone Tower had like the flipping mechanic, which is actually kind of similar to Breath of the Wild dungeons in terms of like interacting with the actual environment itself.
Right.
Excuse me. But I kind of felt like it was just so large in scale and so huge. It kind of became a little daunting, especially when there's a timer. I feel like if there wasn't the timer there, it wouldn't have bothered me as much, because I would have been able to kind of freely roam around, try things out without feeling like I was wasting my time. So like it is like, I think, one of the best dungeons in Zelda, easily. But with that one important caveat.
Did you use any guides at all while you were playing it?
I tried not to, and then there were times where I just had to.
Yeah.
Like having the specifically like right before the boss room, you have to get that chest to be on the ceiling in order to get to the boss room in Stonehauer too. I had to look it up because I'm like, I don't know how to get to the boss. I don't know where the boss is, but I did because it was in that room before, but it had flipped, and like it was just I was really really confused at that point.
I feel like when we played A Link to the Past, we were completely flipped. Where I was where you are, I was like, man, everything is so fucking vague, and I have no idea what to do or where to go, and it's impossible. How are you supposed to know about the fucking chicken in the well or whatever it was? And you were like, oh yeah, I guess I've just played it so many times that it's just second nature for me now. But me playing as an adult for the first time, I was like, Jesus, this game is broken, and the signposting is awful. And so it's a little bit flipped.
And that's one of those things where, like, I will fully admit that I am very biased with this game because, as I talked about at the front, this is a game where I had no reservations about reading guides the full way through to help me get through the experience. And I'm really curious, like, how I would feel about this game if I had no access to any guides, if I had no access to the internet, and I was just trying to figure out how to make my way through the world of Majora's Mask without any help at all. Would I be sitting here being like, oh man, this is one of my favorite Zeldas? Or would I be like, yeah, this game's... I would be right where Holden is, where it's like, yeah, this game's really kind of vague and really not very handholdy.
It's definitely for Zelda pros, which is kind of a weird thing to say, but I would never recommend this as someone's first Zelda game ever. Like, no chance in hell would I think this would ever be the first game.
There are a few things they did in this new 3DS version. Like, they have the hint system with the little things you can crawl in. I remember using that a lot.
Yeah, the Sheikah Stone.
Yeah.
The Sheikah Stone.
They also had, like, for side quest, keeping track of side quests, they made some updates to the Bomber Notebook and things like that too, right?
Yeah, they like significantly overhauled it to make it way easier to keep track of like what events are happening and at what times throughout the day.
Yeah, I remember using those quite frequently when I played it on the 3DS. And then as I mentioned earlier, when I was playing it on Nintendo 64, I had the Prima official strategy guide, like reading through it, you know, more often than not, just drawing the pictures over and over, but also reading through it to figure out what to do next as well.
Yeah. They also introduced a bunch of new save points as well. Previously, in the original version of the game, to save, you had to save at those owl statues. And for the 3DS remake, they introduced a bunch of, like, feather statues that serve as, like, additional save points.
Can I just mention, while we're talking about the 3DS version, I just want to throw out there just like how bummed I am that 3D didn't take off as like a thing across media.
Yeah.
Because going back and playing it today, I was like, geez, this just adds so much to this game, playing it in 3D right now. I miss it. I miss it a lot.
It's great.
I turned it off. Like it's cool.
Oh my God.
I'm like, the battery.
Really?
I just want that battery. I want the battery life.
The 3DS has like notoriously terrible battery life.
But when you have the 3D off, it's not that bad. It's actually better than even the Switch. So, which the Switch doesn't have great battery life, to be fair.
Yours doesn't, but the new ones
so
don't they have like 5 to 7 hours?
Yeah, but I have the OG, so I don't even know about the new ones. So it sounds like we're kind of all on the same page with the dungeons. And we all, in terms of like our favorite, we all like Stone Tower Temple the best.
Yeah.
And you didn't say anything, Cozy, but did you not like the Great Bay Temple as much as we did? Because we did not seem to like that one as much.
I enjoyed it fine. It's definitely a better water dungeon than the water temple from Ocarina of Time.
Yeah. I would agree.
At least that's my take on it. I can see some people being like, I did not love it as much. What makes the water temple in Majora's Mask more bearable is that swimming around as Zora Link is just a little bit more enjoyable than swimming around as Adult Link in Ocarina of Time, IMO. But, you know, neither is a perfect dungeon.
I think I just don't like swimming. I think I hate swimming mechanics, and I haven't found a game that does it in a way that I enjoy it. Because that was a big problem for me, not only in that, but also in like getting the eggs and like just navigating that whole Great Bay area. I just hate swimming in games.
The eggs were awful. That was terrible. That was by far,
especially if you don't have enough bottles and you have to do it like 1 or 2 at a time. Oh my God.
I wouldn't be surprised if that was the reason they increased the bottle count for the 3DS version.
Yeah, so fun fact, I actually came to the realization when you brought up the egg quest a little bit earlier, Chad, that the first time I ever played Majora's Mask, I'm pretty sure that I got to the egg section and stopped playing the game. And then the next time I picked up Majora's Mask, I started from the beginning, and then that I was able to get through the egg section, and that was the first time I was able to actually go through and complete the game.
I think that is this, like, I hear that from so many people who never finish this game, is that they got stuck at the eggs. And that's, like, everyone's story.
Even getting to the eggs, the following the seahorse thing, you take one wrong path and then you're done. Or, like, it shows you, on the 3DS version at least, it shows you the path afterwards. So you've already used the seahorse, so you can just kind of go back and, like, go through the same path again. It shows you on the map. But staying in that path, it is so narrow. Oh, not enjoyable. It was not fun. Did not like. I think that's the thing too, is that there's a lot in this game. There's a lot you have to do before getting to dungeons.
Yeah,
more so than other games.
Yeah, which I mean, I'm not. I personally like the seahorse rescuing the eggs from the eels part aside. I actually enjoyed a lot of the pre-dungeon stuff in this game. Like, I like Zelda games where there is a narrative tied into each individual dungeon. There's like some smaller group of people that has their own kind of issues going on, and you have to help them out. Recently, I've been playing through the remake of A Link's Awakening for the first time, the Switch version, and that game is great, but I will say that a lot of the stories that you have to do before you tackle each of the dungeons in the game kind of range from, oh, this is kind of interesting, to, oh, this feels kind of filler-ish. Like, there's one where you have to take a chain chomp for a walk to clear the entrance to a dungeon, and it's kind of like, okay. And then there's another one where you have to help this character called Richard retrieve these, like, treasures from this castle, and it's like, this is more interesting from a lore perspective, but also this doesn't really have much to do with the dungeon in question that I'm trying to get to. It is cool that in this game, each of the 4 individual dungeons are a little bit more tied into the histories and lore of the kind of different groups and inhabit the 4 quadrants of the world that you're exploring. Whereas it can often feel sometimes in the Zelda series like the dungeons are kind of disconnected from everything else around them, that they just kind of exist for the point of existing. So I do want to shout that out.
Yeah, I think going back to Stone Tower Temple, that one has the best introduction, I think, by far, to one of the dungeons, is going into the was it like a kind of castle or something like that, and using the mirror shield, actually even just using the mask to blend in with the undead dudes that don't even attack you. They're just like dancing in place. That was hilarious and awesome. And I think one of the cooler mini bosses in the game too, which is the 2 skeleton knights and the skeleton like kind of king sitting on the throne. Like, that was really cool. That kind of felt like thematically it fit into the next dungeon really well. I think that was like just that dungeon set is just the highlight of the game by far. But Zora eggs, screw them.
Can we talk about the masks and how cool the masks are? Like, it's a huge mechanic in this game. Is obviously there's the transformation masks.
Is it though? Is there a big mechanic in the game? It's not in the name or anything, Chad. I don't think we need to talk about it.
Obviously there's the transformation masks with, you know, the Deku and the Zora and the Goron mask, which give you like a more so than I think any other Zelda weapon or collectible or like tool. I think those like provide a whole new, completely different game style for each one of those. But I love that there are 24 other masks in the game that all are like significant and actually change the gameplay for you a little bit too. Like the one that makes the zombie people just dance and you kind of blend in with them.
Yeah. There are a lot of like secret functionalities to some of these masks that you wouldn't even know about, or like masks that will trigger unique conversations when you use them to talk to certain people that really kind of enrich the experience in ways you weren't anticipating.
Yeah. When you're fighting the twin snakes, I forget the actual name of the boss.
Twin Mold?
Twin Mold, yes. When you're fighting Twin Mold and you can put on the stone mask and become giant and just start fucking going ham on them like Cat Mario and Bowser's Fury.
That was, by the way, that was another boss battle that was substantially changed from the original version of the game.
Ooh, how so?
In the original version, you actually obtained the Giant's Mask like partway through the temple before the boss battle.
Oh, interesting.
And when you get the mask, it's like, oh man, what a mysterious mask. When will you get to use it? So they changed it in the 3DS remake so that you only get the mask midway through the boss battle, which I totally get that change, because it's kind of like, we might as well give you the mask before you're actually supposed to use it, instead of giving it to you at this sort of weird random point where you could theoretically forget about it in between then and the actual boss battle. And also, when you actually grow to giant size in the middle of the boss battle, in the original version of the game, Link just wields his sword, and in the remake, Link like kind of grapples him with his hands. He doesn't rely on any additional weaponry.
I liked it being in the middle. I didn't know they changed that, because I had already known that you were going to become big in a boss battle. Just have seen retrospectives on Majora's Mask before. I knew that boss battle was coming, but I didn't know that it was twin. There were two of them there. I just thought you fought this big snake as a giant yourself. So when I get in there and I'm not doing that, I'm like, I could have sworn that I was going to become a giant in this area, but there's two of them. So I killed one, and I'm like, oh, I guess that's it. I guess that's what the boss battle was. Interesting. And then it like phase 2 starts after you think it's done. It's like, psych, it's not over yet. That was a cool moment for me. That was a really cool moment.
Yeah, that's a change in the 3DS remake of the game that I thought was actually for the better, and I think actually bettered the experience.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't have thought to use that if I got it midway through the dungeon. No way. I would have been going into random rooms and being like, maybe if I put this on, something happens. I would have no idea what I would have done with it.
Like the description of it, it's like, you can only use this in certain areas, and that's like as vague as it is. Like, well, I'll try it in a few, and if it doesn't work, then I'm going to stop trying it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the masks, I didn't do too much with the masks outside of the mandatory ones, mostly because the masks are largely kept to side quests. And I didn't really enjoy the side quests that much in the game, mostly because of the time mechanic. Side quests just turn into, wait, go here, wait for something to happen at this time, and I didn't enjoy that. I
really liked them because
I can only go here at this day.
I feel like they were what gave the game its character a little bit. Like it's dark. These people are like, we know death. Like there's a married or a couple that's like to be married.
They're supposed to be married, but complications have ensued.
Right.
And as a result, it's like, oh, are they going to be married at all?
Yeah. Are we even going to be married before the world ends and the moon is crashing down? And then like 2 hours before the moon comes, they're like, fuck it, let's get married anyway. I don't care. Let's profess our love for each other right here in front of everyone, and then we'll die together. And like that kind of shit is dark.
Did you complete that side quest, Holden?
I do not think so.
Yeah. So that side quest, it's Anju and I forget what the purple-haired guy's name is.
Cafe?
Yeah. See, the problem is that not only do I not remember his name, but I remember his name also being difficult to pronounce, or like its pronunciation not really being clear. So like that side quest in Majora's Mask is like the most well-known and also longest of all the side quests in the game. And like there's like one part where straight up you basically go into like a miniature dungeon alongside Cafe. And like you actually switch between Link and Cafe at various points to complete the dungeon together. And yeah, as Chad was talking about, it culminates in you basically going to meet up with Anju, the to-be bride, basically in her room, and waiting until like 2 minutes before the world is supposed to end, hoping, praying against all odds that Cafe will come and join her in their final moments. And thankfully, he finally does come at the very, very last minute, and it's this really touching moment of, oh man, you managed to kind of make it at the very, very end.
That's nice. I didn't see it. Definitely didn't see it.
I like those a lot. Or even dealing with like the did you do the mailman one? Where he's
the only time I thought about that one was when you're in the first 3 days and they're just like, just wait around for the moon, and I'm like, the mailman says he's supposed to be out and about at these hours, or he's supposed to be back in his room at these hours, but I can never get in the room, and I'm like, screw the mailman, I don't need to deal with him.
That's another like one of those stories where he's just like, I'm freaking out. Like I am screaming. The world is coming to an end in 3 days, but my job is so important, and I have to stay here and deliver the mail to people. And then finally, you like take that burden from him. You give him a priority piece of mail, and he's like, "Oh, thank God, he can take it and he can run." And you're like, "I'll take over your job. Don't worry." And like those kind of struggles you don't really see in like existential struggles you don't see in a Zelda game. It's usually like, oh no, my chickens aren't in the coop anymore. Oh, what am I gonna do?
Yeah. Oh man, I really love bananas. Too bad there aren't any bananas around here. If only somebody could give me bananas.
I know not Majora's Mask.
Or the freaking
Breath
aliens.
of the Wild actually had some really good side quests like that, like Terry
There are
Town.
aliens in
or
this
there's-
game. Like legit coming to abduct your cows, and this girl's like, I've had nightmares about these aliens, and you got to go and freaking stop the aliens in the middle of the morning and save the cows, and then they're coming to steal the milk, and if you don't do it, then the cows get abducted. She gets amnesia, and she's like, "Who are you?" And her sister's just like, "Oh my God, I should have listened. I can't believe this happened to my families." Those are where I think
did
that's like
see
the
that
secret
one
goal.
the first time I played the game.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure you have to complete that quest if you want to complete the game because you need a Pona to be able to get to the Zora's domain.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Talking about the two farmhands, though, I will say, like, one of the things that I really like about this game, and this, I feel is a good kind of bow on us talking about all of these side quests, is that I feel like of all the Zelda games, Majora's Mask has the most character conversations, character interactions that don't serve any other purpose other than to kind of help flesh out their relationships with one another. Like, I feel like most of the time when I play a Zelda game, I'm looking at a guide and I'm trying to figure out, all right, what characters I need to speak to get, all the heart pieces, all of the sword power-ups, all the information and, keys that I need to get to the next area. And I feel like Majora's Mask has the most bits of dialogue and conversation where it's just like, no, this is just the characters kind of like hashing out how they feel about each other, how they feel about the, predicament that they're currently inside of. I just shared a clip with the two of you that I implore everybody else to go and check out. Basically, if you want to go and check out this clip yourself, it's a YouTube video called Majora's Mask: Secrets. And around the 3.5 minute mark, there's a conversation that you can encounter in the game between Cremia, which is the older of the farm girls, and Romani, which is the younger of the farm girls. It occurs on the third day in Majora's Mask, slightly before nightfall. And basically what's going on is the older sister's like, "Hey, Romani, I previously had denied giving you Chateau Romani, which is like our souped up milk that we make here on the farm, because I said that you would have to wait until you were an adult for me to give it to you. But tonight is a special occasion, and I'm going to give you the Chateau Romani, and we're going to go to bed together, and we can share a bed together, and we'll have a good time this evening." And the younger sister's like, "Okay, sounds good." Doesn't seem, out of context, doesn't seem like that significant of a scene. However, if you played Majora's Mask and you visited the milk bar in Clocktown, you'll know that this specific kind of milk, Chateau Romani, is basically heavily implied to be alcoholic. Ingo, the like weird circus performer guy, like is seen with like a huge hangover one of the days after being at the milk bar. It's implied that if you were to give this kind of milk to a child, she would probably be pretty loopy and out of it. And knowing that basically the world is about to end, that the moon is about to crash down into the earth and kill everyone, it's like, oh, the older sister is giving her younger sister alcohol, allegedly, because this is a T-rated Nintendo game, so that she can possibly sedate her so that she doesn't experience what's about to happen.
Yeah. It reminds me of like on the Titanic, whenever, if you've seen the movie, when the mom is trying to comfort her Irish kids as like the hull is just filling up with water, and she's like, and she's like reading them a bedtime story or something like that. Super tragic.
Yeah.
Yes, that's some dark side. That's why it's as dark as Zelda game.
Yeah.
that would be why.
Not to mention just taking this poor orphan out in the middle of the woods and possessing him and forcing him to do all this shit, and little skull kid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was really sad too, because all the giants are like, "Don't hurt your friend," and it's like they're talking about Skull Kid, like, "Don't hurt, don't." He didn't do anything wrong. It's not his fault.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How
sad
fucking
stuff.
cool, though. How iconic is that Majora's Mask? That maybe is the coolest thing in video, like the coolest, most iconic thing in video games. Maybe not iconic because like Mario and the Pokeball and things like that are, but it's the coolest symbol in video games, I think.
It's also probably one of the
Yeah.
least played Zelda games too, which is kind of funny that that's still one of the most recognizable icons in Zelda.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the guy that designed the mask recently retired from Nintendo, correct?
I don't know.
I don't know. I hadn't heard that.
Let me quickly look that up.
It is definitely the centerpiece of one of the tattoos I'm designing as well. It's just so fucking cool. And I remember as a kid too, like I never actually made it, but I planned out, I was going to get a piece of plywood and I was going to carve it out, and then I was going to like use a Dremel to make the inside to make it actually be like a mask. I was going to make my own Majora's Mask. I never ended up doing it though. Mostly because I was a lazy fat kid who would rather play video games.
So the Nintendo designer in question is Takaya Imamura. He was a designer on games like Star Fox, F-Zero, and The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. According to this Polygon article, though, that I'm reading about Majora's Masks, about Takaya Imamura's retirement, though, it seems like he didn't... It's not clear if he designed the mask itself. He did, however, design Tingle. That's his big claim to fame, which we have not even brought up the fact that this is the first Zelda game with Tingle in it, which is
Tingle.
super duper weird when you think about it, because you'd think that Tingle would like be introduced to the series in a more, carefree and lighthearted game, and not this one.
Yeah, Wind Waker was my first introduction to Tingle, which made a lot more sense.
Yeah.
What a weird guy. What a weird guy. He reminds me a lot of Buster from Arrested Development.
Yeah.
Like, just doesn't know how to
Except
exist
there's
in
no
a
mom
social
around.
public space, really, and a big old mama's boy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tingle, not my favorite Zelda character. Not even
No,
close.
me neither. Although we played MASH a couple weeks ago, and it turns out I'm marrying Tingle, so I'm going to have to get used to him.
That's right. Well, do we have any kind of final thoughts on Majora's Mask before we wrap things up?
I do want to just take a second to talk about a couple of other things in the 3DS
right.
remake.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I feel like we've already talked quite a bit about it. We've talked about some of the changes that were made to the game. Like overall, like I enjoyed the 3DS remake of Majora's Mask when I played it, but I was in a little bit of a different time when I played it. I think that my kind of intricate, deep knowledge of all of the dungeons in the game, knowing how to kind of like fly through it, and some of the changes that they made to the experience that I was not super happy with kind of soured me on it a little bit. I think that overall the 3DS remake of Majora's Mask is a great version of the game, and I think that if you've never played Majora's Mask before, that should probably be the first place that you play it. But I do think that if you beat it and you're like, okay, I really love this game, I want to play it again, I want to experience it again, I want to get everything that there is to get out of Majora's Mask, that you should give the Nintendo 64 version a try. Earlier I talked a little bit about the design of some of the bosses, and I talked about how, like, in the original version of Majora's Mask on the Nintendo 64, it wasn't super clear like how you beat this fish boss in the third dungeon, and how in the 3DS remake they introduced like the huge gaping eyeballs and like all these weird new puzzle mechanics, like the things that you're supposed to ram into the fish while as Zora Link. And it's like, ultimately I think that these things that they introduced in the 3DS remake made sense from the perspective of, we need to kind of make it a little bit more obvious, we need to signpost more what it is that we want the player to do. But I feel like things like the giant eyeballs and other aspects of the game that are a little bit more granular kind of messed with, I feel like, the original design aesthetic that they were going for in the Nintendo 64 version. And I again, I implore everybody who plays the 3DS version of the game to check out the Nintendo 64 version if you enjoyed the 3DS version and you want to get more out of Majora's Mask.
From what I understand, there's also... Actually, I had this GameCube disc. There's a GameCube disc that has both Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask on it, which, of course, is playable on Wii, if you have a Wii still around. And then Virtual Console for Wii, if you still have that available too. So like there are ways you can get your hands on that N64 version, even if you don't have an N64.
That's a good point. You should probably, although I feel like that disc is probably kind of hard to come by nowadays.
Probably.
Although there are other ways, obviously, that you can play Majora's Mask if you look for them. We're not going to endorse anything, but you know. Wink, wink.
I endorse chloroforming your friends who have N64s, taking them, and playing Majora's Mask.
There's one more thing that I also just want to shout out here before we close out the episode. I'm going to post this in the chat. Back in the day, one thing that really kind of left me in awe was this kind of fan theory / super long essay called The Message of Majora's Mask. What I'm posting is a link to, I believe, a copy of the essay, because I'm pretty sure that the original version of the essay was written in like the mid-2000s, and this one is dated to 2012. And this was originally written by a person called Hillian Dan, and I will not go through the entirety of the essay, but basically it details how this person, Hillian Dan, believes that there were all these little like secrets and hints and like kind of signs strewn throughout Majora's Mask to suggest that there's this larger conspiracy going on that basically ties together the worlds of both Termina, which is the world of Majora's Mask, and Hyrule, the world of the other mainline Zelda games. One of the examples of this that he cites, for example, is in the Stone Tower, in the lead up to the Stone Tower Temple, there are these like cubic blocks that have these like gargoyle like textures on them, and these gargoyles on their buttocks are licking a image of the Triforce, which first time that you see it in the game, you might not think anything about it. You might think, oh, whatever, that's super weird. But then when you really think about it, it's like, it's odd that there's an image of the Triforce here, considering that we're in Termina and not Hyrule. And in Termina, the creation myth of Din, Naru, and Ferori, which you're familiar with if you played Ocarina of Time, does not exist here. Like, those goddesses and the Triforce are not part of the mythos of Termina, so why is the Triforce here? And basically, this article goes into extensive detail explaining how all this makes sense, and explaining how actually it's like part of this crazy like behind the scenes mythos about how like the ancient people of Termina tried to go to the heavens to fight the gods and how they didn't succeed in doing so. And it's all really cool. Unfortunately, to bring it back to some of my disappointments with the 3DS remake, they actually removed the texture of the gargoyles licking the Triforce from the 3DS remake. And I don't know if it was like an intentional move on Nintendo's part to try and dispel some of these theories, or just like a modeler who didn't realize what he was doing, who thought, that's a real weird texture, and decided to basically make it something a little bit more normal when he was working on the remake, and didn't receive any input from anyone. But regardless, if any of this is of any interest to you, go check it out. It's, again, this article is called The Message of Majora's Mask. Give it a read.
I will also, for the video you shared earlier and with this article, I will put them in the notes for anyone listening to this on podcasts or watching on YouTube. It's in the notes.
Hell yeah.
Cool. Chad, do you have any closing thoughts on Majora's Mask?
My last closing thought is that I need more media around Majora's Mask. I sent you the video. I sent you both the video, actually, of the Ember Labs, who's making Kingdom Bridge of Spirits. They did like 6 years ago, a short film about, Skull Kid finding Majora's Mask and it taking him over, and like freaking, it's incredible, and it just makes me want more. I want the Netflix Zelda show that apparently got canceled, and I want that to just have like an entire season devoted to Majora's Mask lore and mythos and all that. I want it. That's it. In fact, I
That'd
think
be cool.
every other
That'd be
game
cool.
should be focused on Termina and Majora's Mask, and we should get out of Hyrule and stop with Kakariko Village and Mount Doom.
Ooh.
Yeah,
Ooh.
I'm bored with those.
That
I'm
is
ready for more
dangerous.
Majora.
I would love all of that stuff as well, but I feel like it's not in Nintendo's nature to kind of revisit an idea so thoroughly like what you're describing, unless it's like it's only a few years after and they decide to make a direct sequel to it, like with Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time. But obviously even then you can make the argument of like, well, neither game is like directly connected to each other, so.
Yeah, and I guess the only thing I would want to add to what I've been saying is it's actually kind of funny because I did not mean for this to be a response to what you just said, Chad, but I wasn't a huge fan of Termina. It was fine. I'm happy to go back to Hyrule again, but I appreciate that they did make that risk, and I'm not necessarily opposed to them making a similar risk as well, because even though this game aesthetically looks the same as Ocarina of Time, it really does a lot of truly unique things for the Zelda franchise that I would like to see returned to again in terms of just experimenting. And I really hope that that's what we're going to get with Breath of the Wild 2. I'm starting to get more hyped on that game after playing this, because this is using Breath of the Wild 2 is using the same engine, and they are taking a lot longer to make this one than they did Majora's Mask. I'm kind of feeling like they would really do that, I would hope, if they had some things to do that are different and approaching things from a different perspective. They have a groundwork now with Breath of the Wild, so I'm like, maybe Breath of the Wild 2 will kind of be much more experimental. They certainly did it with Majora's Mask, and that was a risky time to make a huge change like that. Ocarina of Time was the first time that you had a 3D Zelda, and the second one, they're like, let's just go crazy with it and see what we can do. So, yeah, I'm kind of more hyped about Breath of the Wild 2 now to kind of see maybe they will go. It's not just going to be Breath of the Wild 2. It's like there's going to be something a little bit more to it than just that.
And I'm ready for it to be like,
be cool.
And it seems like Breath of the Wild 2 might be leaning a little in this direction. I'm ready for something a little bit more dark and mature, kind of like Majora's Mask was, or even a little bit Twilight Princess.
I believe they said in an interview it's going to be darker.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
I just hope the treasure chests also have things in them that I want. So that's it. But this is not a Breath of the Wild podcast.
Don't get too crazy there, Chad. There'll be lots of opal. You will find lots of opal.
Oh, fucking great.
All right. Well, that was our BARF Backlog Accomplishment. I can't say that. I just can't say it. Every time I try to say it, this whole episode, I can't do it. This is our BARF, our Backlog Accomplishments with Respawn and Friends episode on Majora's Mask. Again, I'm Holden DePardo. I'm here with the co-host as usual with us,
Hola.
Chad Michael Innes.
Hola.
And Cozy, do you want to kind of plug your stuff one more time before we end?
Hell yeah. Sorry, Chad, did you want to go first, though?
Yes, you can find me right here. Okay, your turn.
Okay. Yeah, if you want to find me on the interwebs, you can, of course, find me over on Twitter at twitter.com/Alex Kozina. I really want twitter.com/CozyBear, but I'm unlikely to ever get that handle. It's a big, long story. You can find me on my personal Twitch channel, twitch.tv/CozyBearLive, KOZIBEARLIVE. I used to stream video games on that channel, and recently I made a major switch up there, and now I exclusively stream myself making food on that channel. It's weird and certainly a pretty substantial leap from playing video games, but it's been a real fun time, and we're only getting started there.
Inspired food, though, right?
Yeah, the idea is that I stream every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time a like video game inspired dish. So, like for example, something from the official Overwatch cookbook, or this upcoming Tuesday I'm going to be making the curry recipe that was recently given out to people on the press list for Persona 5 The Phantom Strikers, for example. And every Friday I will at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time I make something that's kind of a little bit more free-form, free-for-all, whatever is sort of on my mind that I feel like whipping up in my kitchen. Of course, if you want to see me on more video game-ish related stuff, you can go to twitch.tv/PressYZ, where you can watch the video game podcast I co-host, and also occasionally catch gameplay streams where I do video gamey stuff there.
Awesome.
Very cool.
I have one last thing I want to say. We met Alex through Year of the Guest, where we had a bunch of guests from a bunch of places come over and be on our show. We're doing it again, and if you want to be just like Alex and be right here with us, go to affableidiots.com. Very first block on that website is a survey to submit and be on our show. Do it. That's it.
Do it.
All right. Thanks for joining, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.